Good afternoon. I'm Carol Emick. I'm president of Child Trends, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the 9th annual Kristin Anderson Moore Lecture. I have a couple of housekeeping details to go through with you. In just a few minutes, we are going to start live streaming this event. And if past experience is any indicator, we will have about 1,000 people watching this event live. So, silence your cell phones now. Please, turn them off. You do not want to be that person. The other thing I want to mention is you have on your chair a little index card and a pen. If right now or during the course of the event you think of a question that you'd like to have asked, write it down and pass it to that way. Pass it.
No, to the side. It'll come to you.
Okay, and pass it to the right. You're right. So, and we will try to get through as many of the questions as we possibly can. I want to say now a few things about this lecture and about the person that it honors. The Kristin Anderson Moore Lecture was established by Child Trends Board of Directors to honor Kris's years of leadership as president of Child Trends from 1992 to 2006. In that time, she built a robust and enduring research center, and she helped promote or launch the careers of many of us who are in senior positions at Child Trends and elsewhere around the country. And we appreciate this opportunity every year to celebrate the contributions that Kris has made both to Child Trends and to the larger research field. And we also like to have this opportunity to say that we are so happy that you remain an integral part of Child Trends as our senior scholar, Kris. So let's just take a minute to celebrate. Kris, I'll just ask you to stand up for a minute so we can just give you a round of applause. So Kris's research spans a wide array of child and youth issues, but for many people, she will always and forever be known for her research in teen pregnancy, and particularly her desire to explore evidence-based approaches to preventing teen pregnancy. So it's no surprise to any of us then that she would ask Sarah Brown to deliver this year's Kristin Anderson Moore Lecture. Kris will introduce Sarah more fully, but I would just say at this moment that, Sarah, you are someone who is very well known here at Child Trends and deeply admired. So we are thrilled to have you here this year. We're also thrilled to have Evelyn Kepler and Ron Haskins here to respond to the lecture and offer their comments and insights. Kris will introduce them more fully as well. I will just say we are honored to have you here. So, without further ado, Kris, will you take your place at the podium and we will start momentarily.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kris Moore, and we are delighted to host this talk and discussion on the role of research in promoting social change, teen pregnancy prevention as a case study. In Washington and across the nation, there are many nonprofits, associations, and advocacy organizations, but the national campaign to prevent teen and unplanned pregnancy has always stood out for me for a number of reasons. The importance of the work, of course, but their sensitivity to the deep and conflicting values that people hold on sex and contraception. Their efforts to reach across geographic and societal boundaries, and the value they place on data, research, and evaluation to inform their work. I'm so pleased that Sarah Brown, co-founder and CEO of the National Campaign, has agreed to share her story. Sarah's recent retirement prompted widespread acclaim for her effective and tireless work. This made it an ideal time to ask Sarah to reflect on how the campaign pursued its mission and how data, research, and evaluation were infused into their approach. We're also joined by Evelyn Kepler, Director of the Office of Adolescent Health, Department of Health and Human Services, and Ron Haskins, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Evelyn and Ron will respond to Sarah's remarks with their own remarks, building on their decades of experience in research, programs, and public policy. After their responses, we'll have time for general discussion, including questions from the audience here at Child Trends and nationwide. If you're watching online, you can submit questions for the Q&A by using the Twitter hashtag #NoTeenPreg. That's hashtag #NoTeenPreg. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our 2015 lecturer, Sarah Brown.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to all of you here, and of course to people being live streamed in. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it sounds very, very imposing. Kris Moore and I first became friends when I was still at the Institute of Medicine. My first and favorite early memory of her was that one afternoon I was having, of course, a lot of trouble with a complicated data problem when I suddenly had the brilliant idea of calling Kris and asking her to solve it. So I dialed her up, remembered dialing, and presented the task and asked her if she would take it on. Happily and characteristically, she agreed to do it. But then with my heart in my mouth, I had to add that I needed the results by the end of the week. She didn't hang up. She didn't freeze me out. She actually laughed, and she said, "Of course you do. This is Washington. I'll do it." And she did, and it was perfect. Kris remains that way to this day, whip smart, strategic, and unfailingly helpful and kind. It's a rare combination anywhere, I think, but especially perhaps in our fair city. In addition, all of us who knew the national campaign in its early days will agree that one of the best decisions our nascent group ever made was to ask Kris to set up and then chair the campaign's first research task force. Under her leadership, the group got off to a truly research-based start, a hallmark attribute that I think made all the difference. Kris, I'm honored to present this year's Kristin Anderson Moore Lecture. Thank you so much for inviting me to do it. I was asked to discuss today the role of social science research in addressing the tough problem of teen pregnancy. The approach I'm going to take is to first talk about how research is central to this issue and to the national campaign in particular, and then go on to argue that science alone cannot be expected to take us over the finish line. It's necessary for sure, but it may not always be sufficient. So first, the good news. When setting up the campaign 2 decades ago, several founding board members, notably Belle Sawhill, Kris Moore, of course, and David Hamburg in particular, talked forcefully about the power of getting the facts straight. They asserted that basing an intense, focused effort as we envisioned the campaign, basing it on solid research, and doing so in a very visible and overt way, would not only signal seriousness of purpose, but would also help to distinguish this new group from others in the sector, many of whom were using research mainly to bolster and justify existing views rather than to assess the impact of current approaches or to chart new ones. As I think Belle said years ago, let's emphasize evidence over ideology. But there were and are many additional reasons to bring a strong research focus to tough social problems, and I'm going to give you about 5 examples. First, good science can help explain to policy leaders, philanthropists, journalists, elected officials, and others why they should invest in efforts to reduce, or even better, to prevent serious problems like teen pregnancy. In other words, why they should care. And as you all know, and thanks in part to Kris Moore's own work, a strong case can be made here. For example, compared to children born to older women, children born to teenage girls are more likely to drop out of high school, become teen parents themselves, rely on Medicaid and S-chip, experience abuse and neglect, enter the foster care system, be raised in single-parent families, and in particular grow up in poverty. Putting much of this together, many of us continue to update and cite a formulation Nick Zill first offered years ago. A child born to a teen mother who is unmarried and has not finished high school is 9 times more likely to be poor than a baby born to a woman who is not a teen, has finished high school, and is married. Now, let me acknowledge here in the presence of so many distinguished researchers that we have no random assignment studies to cite that have assessed the effects of being a teen mother rather than an older one on a range of outcomes. But we do have many other bodies of evidence on the negative impact of teen pregnancy, data that have been reviewed and summarized by many people in this room and beyond. Now, interestingly, and somewhat on the side, I have found that the general public is often farther down the road than we are in assessing the risks. Most Americans, as you may know, think that the epidemic of teen pregnancy is still on the rise, even though, of course, it most certainly is not. But of more concern to me is that many overestimate, in my view, the risk posed to young women and their babies by teen pregnancy. I have heard people say repeatedly over the last 2 decades that teen pregnancy is probably the most serious problem affecting the nation. I go, really? The most serious? I was so struck by such hyperbole that in recent years I've often ended speeches with the admonition that we must be careful not to inflate the risk posed by teen pregnancy. Yes, it does get in the way of critically needed education and contributes to poverty, goes hand in hand with father absence and single parenthood. I understand all of that. But we also have to tell the truth, which is that especially for the most disadvantaged, simply postponing a birth for a few years may not make much of a difference if there is no simultaneous progress on other fronts: schools, employment, family structure, opportunity, and more. So bottom line, research helps to answer the threshold question of why should I care? But somewhat paradoxically, our listening public sometimes overestimates its prevalence and negative effects. Here's a second example. Research and data help us to understand where a problem is centered. That is, which groups are driving it and where remedial efforts should be concentrated. Now, this may seem quite obvious to all of us, but it's not always clear to me that the basic descriptive epidemiology of tough issues gets assessed carefully. My best example of this is a number that the campaign has long touted, which is simply that at present, at least 2/3 of pregnancies and births are to girls 18 and 19. A datum that obviously has major implications for program interventions and messaging. This number is important because many program leaders who work in this area address only middle and high school youth. Now, that's valuable, of course, but given that some amount of post-secondary education is now required beyond high school to secure a good job in our knowledge-based economy, focusing on those 18 and 19 is increasingly important. This simple 2/3 factoid is one main reason that the campaign, and in particular wonderful Andrea Kane, have long advocated for including pregnancy planning and prevention in community colleges and other settings where older adolescents can be found. And it's a concept I'm happy to report that's really gaining traction. Now, I do understand, of course, that even if we only wanted to reduce pregnancy amongst 18 and 19-year-olds, we would undoubtedly begin by intervening at younger ages. And moreover, some assert that the consequences of childbearing may be far worse for younger teens. But here's what I think the truth is. The exclusion of teens 18 and 19 in many prevention efforts rarely reflects a careful consideration of where teen pregnancy and childbearing are actually concentrated. I often say that when this topic is on the table, the image that I think people have in their minds is the 16-year-old girl or the 14-year-old girl. Example 3. Research can also help to track progress and in particular to set performance goals. Kris and I well remember, and still talk about it, an endless phone call we had over 20 years ago during a snowstorm. We were working from home long before that was cool, trying to come up with a clear, powerful teen pregnancy goal for the national campaign and for the nation. In typical fashion, Kris said, well, let's begin by looking at data from other countries as well as trends over time in the U.S. to see what those numbers suggest might be possible down the road here. Hours later, we came up with a goal. How about we challenge the nation to a 1/3 reduction in teen pregnancy over the next 10 years? It would be impossible for me to overstate the power of that goal. It led many states to set their own specific targets, and the press citations of it were almost endless. It was specific, it had a time frame, and was easily understood. It was fresh, and if I may say so, quite different from many social welfare initiatives whose leaders simply want things to get better, but rarely say by how much or by when. And also, by the way, the goal was met in less than 10 years, and the rate of decline is in fact accelerating. Teen births are now down about 60% since the early 1990s. Example 4. Research can help attach costs to an issue, which is a critical part of the reasons we can offer to increase interest in prevention. One of the most popular and widely used data sets compiled by the national campaign is its national and state level estimates of the public sector costs of teen childbearing. Although some feel it's wrong to cost out human life in childbearing and that doing so stigmatizes teen parents, I am more persuaded by the fact that in an era of tight budgets and endless demands on the public purse, being able to muster a cost-based argument for investing in prevention is essential. And I can assure you that especially at the state level, where often the requirement is to balance the budget, being able to present compelling numbers about the cost of teen childbearing has long been one of the most effective and strongest arguments available. Fifth and final example of the good news. Evaluation research in particular can help many sectors, funders, program leaders, and others too, decide which interventions to put in place and expand. In this spirit, one of the campaign's first steps was to do a thorough literature review of what was known about the impact of numerous programs that were alleged to reduce teen pregnancy. This seemed reasonable to all of us, especially given our commitment to being a research-based organization, but we soon learned that it was apparently controversial. Many in the field asserted that we already knew what to do, which was, by and large, to offer more sex education in schools. Although, as you all remember, there soon developed a large amount of controversy and argument about what the content of the curriculum should be. Interestingly, we were unable at the time to find a hard-nosed assessment of the evidence behind various approaches to reducing teen pregnancy. Soon, though, and through the tireless efforts of Doug Kirby, Kris Moore, and others, we produced a review of available data on program impact, whose main conclusion was that there were some leads, there were some hopeful signs for sure, but the title said it clearly: no easy answers. This apparently was heresy to some, but in fact I think it cemented our claim of being research-based. The good news, by the way, is that the evidence available in this area is now much stronger. We now refer to emerging answers. And of course, both Evelyn Kepler and Ron Haskins, who'll speak in a minute, have done a great deal to encourage a stronger reliance on evidence, especially in guiding public expenditures. So that's the good news. Research and evidence can make a big difference, but under the heading of no good deed goes unpunished, there is, of course, a flip side. Research can help, but it rarely settles tough issues, particularly those that attract strong feelings. And what is more personal and emotional than pregnancy and childbearing, especially to adolescents? Isn't pregnancy invariably an intense phenomenon, almost no matter what? Almost no matter what the surrounding circumstances, it always leads to a lot of feeling and emotion. And there are any number of issues that can come into play, in fact, that usually come into play. Sex, of course, consent and intent, personal and family histories, faith and values, cultural context, and the long arc of family life, to name just a few. Every major religion speaks about family, the rearing of children, the role of sex and adult relationships, and more. And in all these many domains, mind you, there is no mention of research, confidence intervals, or tests of significance. Now, given all this, how can we be surprised when rational answers and analyses are often trumped by personal feelings and experience? I remember distinctly someone saying to me recently, "Well, Mrs. Brown," I know I'm in trouble when someone says Mrs. Brown. "Well, Mrs. Brown, your facts may be right, but I still disagree with you intensely." Somewhat related is that the impact of research can be constrained when there is a basic confusion about what we're even discussing, and when the controversies and emotion in our field impede reasonable conversation. I'm sure most of you have had an experience like this or something like it. We stand up or have a turn at the podium to talk about issues A and B. We're well prepared, we're well dressed, we're reasonably clear, we have a PowerPoint, and we cite a bit of research along the way. But as the afternoon gets going, we soon find that our audience is actually focused on issues C and D, and maybe even a bit of F and M. For example, we may want to talk about unplanned, unintended pregnancy among young adults in their 20s, but our audience cannot see beyond teenagers. We may be eager to describe media-based ways to help reduce teen pregnancy, but the audience is fixated on how media is the cause of the problem in the first place. We may want to talk about contraception for teens, especially long-acting reversible methods, and yet in no time, the conversation has moved to abortion and to all the controversy that continues to attach to it, along with some other hot-button issue thrown in, like fear that condoms are going to be distributed in 5th grade in the local school. This experience has been so common for me over the years that I developed the mental image of a vortex. I would call it the vortex of ick. And it's sometimes seen that no matter where the conversation started out, no matter how carefully I chose my words, the risk was always present that it would veer off into some other area that was controversial, deeply felt, and hard to control or corral. In other words, in this fraud area and in many settings, feelings and personal experience can run so high that not only is research not dispositive, but it may well be that we're not even talking about the same things at all. Finally, that blessed word, data and research don't always and necessarily help a great deal when one is trying to sell a new way of thinking or seeing the world, what I believe is called a paradigm shift. Case in point, I'm continually struck by the total absence of pregnancy planning, spacing, and prevention in virtually all discussions of how to improve overall child and family well-being, as well as in the current discussions about how to increase opportunity in America. Countless good suggestions are made about what should be done, but virtually no mention is ever made of the contribution that voluntary pregnancy planning and contraception can make to strengthening child and family welfare. Wise souls say we must start early or start at the beginning, but if you listen very carefully, you will notice that the beginning is the prenatal period at best, not the choice or event of becoming pregnant or causing a pregnancy. The programs and education and supports all spring into action once there's a positive pregnancy test in hand. But the silence surrounds what has led to that moment. Those of you in the audience may be shown now one single PowerPoint screen, and I think all of you were sitting on or have one slide. This is a chart that I developed several years ago to help make the simple point that our efforts to improve overall child and family well-being are incomplete. The star is the moment of conception. If you think about it, an immense number of child and family-centered groups focus on services and policies that should come into play after pregnancy is in place, to the right of the vertical dotted line. But rarely is there even a brief mention by these same groups of the time just before the star, when decisions about when, with whom, and under what circumstances to become pregnant or cause a pregnancy, when those issues are in play. Is it because research is inadequate about the links here? I don't think so. Many international family planning initiatives have long been explained and justified as a means to reduce infant mortality, improve overall maternal and child health, increase women's education, and far more as well. Belle Sawhill's recent book, Generation Unbound, makes a strong evidence-based case for pregnancy and tenderness having a measurable effect on family structure and other key measures. Scholars at Brookings, with the active help of Child Trends, I might add, have released a number of analyses in recent years that also make these connections, and the national campaign has done so as well. In fact, I would argue that the evidence linking pregnancy planning and intendedness to positive outcomes over time is about as strong as the data on the negative impact of teen pregnancy and childbearing on many of these same outcomes. I think that the gap and omission are not because the research is weak or inconclusive, but rather a basic discomfort in talking about this sensitive and personal area of human life, and a legitimate fear that if we do encourage more open, respectful discussion in the child and family sector, more broadly too, of pregnancy planning and contraception, we will somehow get in trouble and find ourselves mired in controversies, abortion and sex among unmarried people in particular, that we neither welcome nor that advance the conversation. In other words, we fear the vortex of ick. We avoid the topic, or we raise it in a soft voice, maybe in a private discussion, not in the plenary session. It's far less risky to talk about services for pregnant women or young children than to talk about helping sexually active people plan pregnancy and, if they wish, use contraception, even though decisions and actions at both stages have long-term significant effects. In addition, I have sometimes heard leaders say that they simply had not really even thought about this missing piece. Once the issue's raised and the gap clearly laid out, and maybe my little chart has been shown, they may even say that they're almost embarrassed now to see the omission. That's hard to fathom, I know, but it shows that when things aren't raised openly or talked about enough, they sometimes fade into the background. They become invisible, gone, and forgotten. Until, of course, people like all of us choose to bring it up, again, in the context of child and family well-being. Whatever the reason or remedy, I urge all of us to think hard about this gap. There are many things this nation could and should do to improve the overall well-being of children and families. The list is long and important, but it's incomplete. Can we not add in pregnancy planning, spacing, timing, and prevention, including contraception? Not with a whisper or a lowered voice or downcast eyes, but with confidence, ease, and the firm knowledge that not only is research on our side, but so also are common sense and human experience. I meant to bring a t-shirt with me today that's part of the campaign's effort called Thanks Birth Control. It says on the front of it, healthy children, happy parents, stable families, thanks birth control. I think that summarizes this last point. And with that, and on time, let me close with my thanks again for being invited to give the Kristin Anderson Moore Lecture. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, Sarah. Now we'll turn to Evelyn Kepler, Director of the Office of Adolescent Health.
Well, first I want to thank Child Trends and Kris Moore and Carol for inviting me here to participate as a discussant. It's truly a privilege. I'm also honored to be here with Sarah, who's been such an awesome leader in the field of teen pregnancy prevention, and with Ron, who's been such an advocate for the use of evidence-based work in social change. I join you here today to share some reflections as the Director of the Office of Adolescent Health. Some of you may be familiar with our mission, which is to help adolescents become healthy, productive adults using the best available science. And as part of that mission, we manage the first national evidence-based teen pregnancy prevention program. And hopefully I will stay within my 7 minutes. So I have 5 points I want to make before I may get the hook from John. And my 5 points in response to some of Sarah's comments. The first is the importance of recognizing that we're part of a broader movement that's underway within the federal government, a broader movement to use evidence to inform programs and to utilize funding in programs that have demonstrated that they have effect. And I think Sarah pointed to that when you were building the campaign, how your focus really was how do we use the best evidence available and research available to build this work upon. The second point I want to make is that the evidence-based approach that we're using in the teen pregnancy prevention program is among a series of major firsts for the field of teen pregnancy prevention. My third point is that using research to promote social change means we really have to be willing to commit to building, using, and learning from the evidence. And that sounds easy, but it's hard work. I think Sarah talked about the hard-nosed assessment about the evidence, the hard-nosed assessment about what constitutes the evidence. Do we like the evidence? How do we use the evidence? And in using the evidence, are we willing to set aside what we thought we liked before, but science hasn't shown really is effective? That's a hard thing to do. I think that goes back to Sarah's comment as well about a deep respect for using the evidence and the seriousness of our purpose in using it. My fourth point is the need to understand that evidence-based approaches operate in larger systems and in diverse communities. And then my final point, and I think this goes to Sarah's point about conversations, is that while we often get into these situations of toxic controversies that may impede reasonable conversations, we have an obligation and a duty to educate others about the work we do and how we use science in the work we do. And so I would actually encourage all of us to really look at how we build the narrative. We create the narrative, we control the narrative, and we continue that narrative no matter what the obstacles are in terms of people trying to redirect the conversation. So I want to delve a little bit into each of those points in talking about the teen pregnancy prevention program being part of a broader movement throughout the government to build, use, and learn the evidence. It's also important to know that this is driving investments of limited federal dollars in how we fund programs and activities, and especially those that have shown to be effective and have outcomes on behavior. When the teen pregnancy prevention program was created back in 2010, it was one of 6 major evidence-based programs that this administration initiated. And it's a movement to shift resources to those programs and practices that are based in good evidence and data. And what we really want here is not just to use the data, but we want to use that science to know that we are having lasting results in the health and well-being of the young people we're working with, their families, and the communities that they live in. And a central feature to this evidence-based approach is the fact that it's tiered. The bulk of resources is dedicated to replicating what science says so far works, and then a smaller portion of funds is available for building that evidence out further and relying on rigorous evaluation to do that. My second point was that it's really a time of a series of major firsts for the teen pregnancy prevention program. And some of these firsts include, it's the first time we've engaged in an evidence-based approach to teen pregnancy prevention at a national level. It's the first time the government has systematically used rigorous evaluation in the programs that we're implementing in communities. And it's the first time we've defined what constitutes that evidence. This is a major movement forward that ought to be celebrated. Sarah talked about Doug Kirby's work. This is a true legacy to the work that he began and is now across the nation. We in the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program just are ending our first cohort of projects from 2010 to 2015, and we think we've had a number of successes that will contribute significantly to the evidence base. We've learned a tremendous amount this last 5 years about fidelity, adaptations, implementation science, and how you use rigorous evaluation in community-based programs. We've also learned about the gaps, and Sarah talked about one of those gaps. How do we work with older teens, those who are 18 and 19? How do we work with those who have a second pregnancy to prevent a further pregnancy? How do we work with some of the most vulnerable populations, including those in foster care and juvenile justice? My third point was about building, using, and learning from the evidence. We in the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program really consider the work we do to be building a culture of learning. It's important to know that this year there will be over 40 evaluations rolling out from the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program. And those will help inform the evidence base, and they will also help inform communities in implementing the work that they're doing in teen pregnancy prevention. My fourth point was that evidence-based approaches operate in a larger context and in larger systems. We know that in order to have the biggest impact on youth, we really have to learn from the research and the evidence. We have to be willing to use that evidence base in the context of a community. In the second cohort of teen pregnancy prevention grants, you'll see that we've really redesigned and reframed our work in the context of using multiple evidence-based interventions across middle schools, high schools, and with vulnerable populations, looking at how do we also work with LGBT youth who are often excluded from this kind of work. How do we engage youth who have experienced trauma in their life? How do we make sure that there are safe and supportive environments for the young people we're working with? And in closing, my final comment goes back to telling our story. As contentious as the conversations can be around sexual health and teen pregnancy prevention, I think it's key to keep all of us grounded in the science, and most importantly, what the science can do in terms of successful and positive outcomes, because the ultimate goal here is helping young people plan their futures by providing them the skills and the holistic approaches that they need in order to transition into a healthy adulthood. So I think I stayed within my time.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Now we turn to Ron Haskins, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution.
Thank you. Well, something that's always bothered me about occasions like this is that you pretty much have to start out by saying what great people these are that are being honored. And Kris Moore is spectacular, and there's not even a word for Sarah and so forth. And the same with Evelyn, who's doing, I think, an incredibly important job and doing it very well. So trust me that I really think all those things are true, and now I'm going to go on to my remarks. First, there's a really interesting evidence-based issue before us, which is teen pregnancy has declined so much it's almost unbelievable. If we didn't have good data, we wouldn't believe it. A decline every year except 2 since 1991, and a total decline of 60%. Name another public problem, especially for kids, that has shown that kind of success. It's amazing. I love to talk about it. I include it in lots of speeches and so forth. Why? This is what we want to do with all our public policies. We want problems to decline by 60%, good things to increase by 60%, and we don't. My argument is we don't have the foggiest idea why they went down. I mean, we can name a bunch of things that are undoubtedly pertinent. The first one that I would bring up, with Evelyn sitting here, because she might whack me if I didn't, is programs. Teen pregnancy prevention programs, I bet, played some role here. Well, how much? 10% of the decline? 50%? I don't think we have any idea. Not only that, I don't think we even know how to study that. So that's a big issue. And another issue that I always want to talk about, and I think it's super important, it's almost impossible to study, is something you might call the society-wide value-based attitude about whatever the problem is. And I think over the last 20 years, I'm thinking back speeches I heard various people make and points I heard people make, and including kids, is that we have a virtually total agreement that teen pregnancy is a bad idea. And because of the national campaign, we're getting the same impression about unplanned pregnancy is also a bad idea. But think about it. I mean, teachers believe that. Ministers believe that. Public figure, you ever hear a speech from a public figure about rah-rah for teen pregnancy? No, it never happens. Parents believe it. The wonderful surveys that you do show that 90% of parents think it's a big problem. They want to do something about it. And even the kids say it's a bad idea. Like 80 to 90% of the kids. So we have complete agreement in our society we ought to do something about this. Now, there's still a lot to fight about. We can fight about whether it ought to be abstinence education or use of various devices. So there are a lot of things we can argue about. But I think that's an important factor. But try to figure out a way to study that. How can we figure out how much that has contributed to the decline in teen pregnancy, and how could we replicate that unanimity of opinion in other areas where I think at least latent, it exists. So that's another issue that we ought to think about. And then we should spell out in detail how each of these various factors, I mean, think of all the things I haven't mentioned, TV and music, churches, parents, so forth. What role do they play, and how important is that, and how can we make sure that that aligns with the public policy goals that we want to have? So if you're thinking about really attacking a national problem, just studies of programs, as crucial as they are, and I completely endorse them. I wrote a book about it. I'm going to write another book about it. I think we're at a crucial moment. I completely agree with what Evelyn said, but it goes way beyond programs, and we need to understand those things too. We need to focus on them and learn how to make them contribute. Now let me turn to what we're going to learn and what we should learn from the evidence-based programs. I agree, it's a crucial moment, and not only that, it's in a way unfortunate, but we have lots of evaluations coming out, not just in teen pregnancy, but we have an evaluation to die for on home visiting. That and the evaluations of teen pregnancy, I think, are the two most complete and spectacular evaluations of social programs we've ever had in the United States. So those are all coming out at the same time starting this year. I know you're going to be getting data within the next 6 months that will tell us a lot about teen pregnancy. But think about this. I'm going to use example of the PrEP program, which is not on your jurisdiction. That's why I chose it. So the PrEP program is very much like teen pregnancy prevention, all right? Passed at the same time. I would say that it was an example of the way Congress operates. If the Republicans and Democrats don't agree, give everybody what they want if we got the money, and that's what they did in this case. They struck a deal late at night in a finance committee, and we wound up with PrEP and the teen pregnancy prevention program. So PrEP is in 44 states, 306 providers, 1,350 implementation sites. How do we study that? Now, we made a good, this is the first time we've tried to do it, I think, with both teen pregnancy prevention and with home visiting, and it's a mixture of things in both cases, and in PrEP too, I assume. So we're going to learn a lot about how to do it, but this is a very big question. If we want to have national impacts, we need to learn to take advantage of the evaluations in all the places, or at least some way to measure what goes on in more than just a couple of places. In PrEP, for example, there are going to be 4 random assignment experiments. There will be 1,350 implementation sites. We're going to have 4 random assignment experiments. Can we generalize from those 4 sites at 1,350? Everybody knows the answer is no, but I want to solve it. I want to figure out how we can really use information from more sites than that and how we can collect that information. In addition to home visiting, which has at least 700 sites, I know for sure, and the various teen pregnancy prevention programs, we also have I3, which has hundreds of sites investing in innovation, which is roughly speaking an education intervention. And we also have SIF, the Social Innovation Fund, which was enacted almost at the same time and now has lots of evaluations coming in. And all this is happening at the same time. 1 minute, wow. I'm going to talk at the speed of light. The first problem with this is Congress can't handle it. This is a problem we got to do something about. We've got to figure out ways to get to Congress so they know how to take into account evaluation results in funding programs. And even if you have 1 or 2 evaluations, it's hard to get Congress to pay attention. What if you have 30 or 40 and all this sophisticated stuff? Congress may have a hearing, but I wonder how many members are really going to be able to profit from it. And then the last thing I want to say, this is extremely important. Experience shows us that 80 to 90% of these programs are going to fail. So what do we do? Say, that's it, you're closed down. No, we cannot do that. We have to have administrators with the attitude that you have to fail to succeed. As long as you use your evaluation results and try new things and continue evaluating those, that's half of the Obama approach, continuous evaluation. That has to be an essential message that we give to these programs when they fail, as they inevitably will.
Great.
I was stopped by the clock.
Okay. Thank you, Ron.
And boy, are we lucky.
We'll have questions. We have time for Q&A. And I want to remind the national audience that the hashtag #NoTeenPreg is the Twitter account to send questions to. So, but to start the discussion, do you think that this evidence-based movement is likely to last? You've all referred to an increase in it. Do you think it's likely to hold water for years?
You were directing that at these two.
Well, all of you.
Go ahead.
Well, I will take the optimist's viewpoint. I think that there's a movement underway, and like most movements, it's going to take time and commitment. I talked about the teen pregnancy prevention program and the use of evidence being a series of major firsts. And we have built this body of evidence. It was built initially by the work of the National Campaign and others. And now we have a bolus of programs, 38 evidence-based programs that have been identified as having positive effects on outcomes for young people. We expect through the work that we're doing in our evaluations that we'll see potentially between 8 and 9 new evidence-based programs. There is, of course, some questions about the depth of the evidence and the need to continue the evaluation work. I think the central question is, if we're not using science and evaluation to continuously inform our work, what are we going to use as the basis for making our goals and doing our work?
Okay, I'm going to be optimistic too.
Good.
But I still have some real reservations. First of all, the Obama initiatives, there are 6 of them, you could count up to 8 maybe, but 6 that I studied. And it's an amazing thing that they all got through Congress and they're all at various stages of implementation. We've never seen anything like this before. They emphasize 2 things. Number one, that you have to spend federal dollars on evidence-based programs. That's never happened before. It seems like such a logical thing, but we never did it before. And the second thing is you have to evaluate the programs like mad. And you even have to set aside money. You have to use random assignment and so forth. So if this approach of evidence-based can work, some of the programs at least, including some years, are going to show that we can improve outcomes by following evidence-based policy. That's a good thing. Then there are all kinds of other organizations and movements, I would even call them, that have arisen in the last 5 to 10 years that are solidly based on evidence. Results first. That Pew and MacArthur are funding is amazing. They're working with the states to implement an evidence-based approach. So far, 19 states, including North Carolina. I'm involved in some stuff in North Carolina, and I would never have predicted that North Carolina would ever do anything like this. So there's a good chance it'll happen at the state level. Foundations, many foundations are putting up big bucks, Arnold especially, but many others, Gates, I mentioned Pew and MacArthur and many others. Then the administration, in addition to the programs I just described, they set up this new behavioral unit within the White House. And they just published a report last year. I urge you to read the report. They did 17 random assignment experiments on huge questions like, how can we get federal employees in the Department of Agriculture to do 2-sided copying? And guess what? they were immensely successful, and they saved a lot of money doing it. So that kind of approach is also very good and has great benefit cost figures. And then finally, there's a lot of lobbyists in town who really believe in evidence-based policy. Results for America is a great example of this. So I think there's a fairly good chance that this could actually catch on and hold. My greatest fear, that Republicans resent Obama so much that they're going to cut the spending on the Obama evidence-based initiatives. They've already killed, maybe, we won't know for a couple weeks, but or 9 days, I guess, the teen pregnancy prevention program. The House completely killed it, not only the money, but the language even. And they've also done the same thing with I-3 and so forth. Now, the compromisers being me, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but they're going to start falling, and that really concerns me.
Sarah, did you want?
Well, I was going to make a couple of the points Ron did, which is that even whatever the federal government may say, there's a large movement, particularly in the philanthropic sector, to ask for results. And I think that some of these foundations are enormously influential in setting the tone in their own state governments, in graduate schools, universities, and so forth. So I think it's unlikely that we would ever go back 20 years, sort of, that the program leaders believe in it, that's enough for us. I want to comment, though, on something Ron said in his remarks, which is back to this sort of use of research in this field. You raised a really important question, which is why did the rates go down? And I do think we still need a lot more scholarship in that area. Not only do we need to know things about social norms and values, which you talked about, the national agreement and so forth, but we are lacking information on the most fundamental issue, which is what proportion of the decline is due to fewer teens having sex, and what proportion of the decline is due to those children who are having sex using contraception better. And it's very important to understand what has gone on. And because of the various data sets, and you all know this better than I do, we really don't have good information on that. And absent that information, forget about why they might have done those two things, the parents and the schools and the programs and the media and so forth. If we don't know what proportion is due to explanation A or B, our ability to project forward and program for it and work in this area is severely hampered. So all of you who are in control of federal data sets and questions and so forth, I really urge you to sharpen and expand the questions we now ask that would get us to that simple question: what proportion is less sex and what proportion is more contraception?
I have a question for Sarah. In your opinion, why is the public misinformed, and who is responsible for setting the record straight?
For setting
the record straight.
Well, I'm sorry Bill Albert isn't here, the communications wizard at the national campaign, because I always would tell him he was doing a really bad job because people overestimated the impact of teen pregnancy. He said, no, I'm doing a really good job. They now sort of get it. I don't know. I think that it feeds into a kind of common view that teenagers are sort of on the lam, out of control, and so forth. So obviously it must be getting worse. That's the only explanation I've ever heard. Some people can even defend it. But it's very clear that the average American, if we grab someone off the street here, they would say teen pregnancy is continuing to go up. It just is feeling teens are out of control. There's drugs, high school, something. It's just a very foggy but deeply felt view that teenagers are up to no good, something like that, and therefore the pregnancy rate, which has been talked about a lot, must be going up. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to share the good news. I mean, for example, one of the biggest pieces of good news, it's the best story never told, is that African American teenagers have had the steepest decline in teen pregnancy and childbearing. I've often pitched reporters that idea that they should write about this. This is a community that has done extraordinary work, and the rates have gone down far more than the national averages. But again, we don't seem to be able to get traction. I think even the reporters sort of feel that, I don't know, maybe it's not as good. Things probably aren't going very well. So when we say, no, there's good news here, it takes a very interested, analytic, research-oriented one to say, yes, let's talk about the good news. So I think it's a combination of the press, media outlets, and all the various advocacy groups and research groups like Child Trends and the campaign and many others to keep saying that there is good news, we are doing better, and there have been some pockets of particular progress.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question from Twitter. How can we reach older teens who are not in higher education? Most interventions are geared toward younger teens.
Well, I'll give it to Evelyn in 2 seconds. I mean, that's why we started in on community colleges. I mean, there are over 11 million students in the U.S. who are in community colleges. Some of them are, of course, in their 20s, if not their 30s, but many of them are young adults. And a lot of community colleges are very receptive to this work because they see that if a young woman becomes pregnant unintentionally while she's in college, her chances of not completing it are very high. And it's especially true for the young men because they are old enough to be held responsible for child support payments, and therefore any few hours that they have will now have to go to paid employment. But the other place to reach, of course, everybody is online. And so I think one of the reasons that efforts like the National Campaign's Bedsider program and others are very, very powerful. That is where young adults are, teenagers as well. So I think it's online and in community colleges at a minimum.
Let me add something very quickly. We actually have pretty good evidence on this from the programs in Iowa, Colorado, St. Louis, and the San Francisco Random Assignment Program, and all of them show that they attracted thousands of women to come to clinics. Now, some of them were already coming, but these are Title X clinics, other health clinics. So the providers are an important part of this, to get them the message, and not only that, but when they gave good information, counseling, almost everybody who does pregnancy prevention thinks counseling is a crucial part of it. And both the Colorado and St. Louis studies showed that when you counsel and tell women all the things that are available, about 70% of them choose the most effective methods. You know, now we don't know exactly if it was a little biased and they pressed the women, we don't know, but 70%. So I agree, PR is an important thing, but the clinics, I think, are really the key here, and public advertisements. Those are the ways that we can get women to come to clinics, and then if what happens in the clinic is effective, that's when we're really going to have an impact.
And I would just add, when we're talking about 18 and 19-year-olds, we're talking about a different population than those who are 16 and 17. They're considered adults. So the way in which we reach them and the messages are different, and the settings. The fact that clinic-based settings are a great place for 18 and 19-year-olds has a lot to do at where they are developmentally and legally within, you know, their states and their access to services. So I think it's a whole different message. It's a whole different set of services, and it is a bit difficult because they're no longer a captive audience necessarily in schools.
So another question. In a nation with polarized views on so many topics, do you think research and evaluation can or does provide common ground?
I will talk from the perspective of the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program, and I think one of the advantages of using evidence-based teen pregnancy prevention programs is that there is such diversity in the evidence base, and there is enough for a different community to pick a program that will fit within its own community values and fit the population that they're looking to serve. With 38 evidence-based programs right now, there's a range, and communities can select what works best for them. And part of what I was talking about earlier, too, was that it's not just an evidence-based program in isolation. It's in the context of the community. It's wrapped with referrals and linkages to health care. It's ensuring that it's a safe and supportive environment for those young people. It's engaging those who are often excluded. And so it's also done in multiple times during an adolescent's development, middle school, high school, after school, in a vulnerable population setting as well. So I think there's lots of ways in which the evidence-based programs can help with communities in that way.
Here's a reasonable way to think about this issue. We live in a democracy, and if you spend any time on the Hill and watch the way that sausage is actually made, there are so many factors that influence what goes on the Hill, and no one could ever control all of them. Our goal should be, my goal, personal goal is, I'll just speak for myself, is to expand the influence of evidence. We want a bigger seat at the table. We don't want to dominate the table. We want democracy to prevail, but we want to expand the role of evidence, and the single best way to do it is to show that programs can work better if they're based on evidence, and most of all, to show policymakers they can save money if they invest in programs that are evidence-based.
Yeah, the money point is really, really important. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk about how unfortunate I think it is that pregnancy planning, prevention, contraception, all this stuff is absent from the child and family well-being agenda, is that I think that is one way to increase the common ground. If the number of groups and the sort of squeaky cleanness and the mother and apple pie-ness of child well-being and little babies and prenatal care and yum, 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 if we can somehow get in there that there's another part of it, which is planning and spacing and attending pregnancy, and then we can talk about the prenatal care and the apple pie and the kindergarten and home visiting and, you know, early intervention and Head Start and all that stuff. I think that's the proper place for a lot of these issues, not the only place, but it's a proper place, and I think it also provides a context that is less controversial and tends to bring in more people and expand common ground. If the only time that preventing, planning, pregnancy, contraception, and so forth is as a wholly separate issue, separate groups, you know, in another part of town, it is going to remain vulnerable. I used to tell the story about visiting a small Midwestern city, which shall remain nameless, and they had just built their new health department. And I was taken on a tour of it, and it was wonderful. And we had it was one of the few remaining ones that provides direct services. We had pediatrics, and we had communicable diseases, and we had water, this, and so forth. And I just said at one point, very in a small voice, "Where's the family planning clinic?" Because I happened to know that they used to have a very good one. In fact, that was not even in the building. It wasn't in the building. It was relocated 3 blocks away near, I don't know, Acme Tire and Glass or something. It was a separate building. And I thought, that's it. That's the vulnerability. Rather than saying, you know, we've got TB, we've got pediatrics, we've got surveillance, health education, family planning, and they all work together at different life stages, and they're just part of the human experience. That is what I think we need to bring this in out of the cold into the sector where in many parts of the world, particularly Western Europe, it's properly lodged. It's not a separate, vulnerable, separately financed and discussed problem or opportunity.
Okay, with 2 minutes left, I want to give Sarah a minute to talk about intendedness. You talked a lot about the importance of intendedness. Can we measure it? It's not like age. Can we measure it?
Yeah, one of the beauties of teen pregnancy is that if there's a teen in the person's age, you know it's a teen pregnancy, 13, 19. Whereas when you talk about intendedness, the first question is, well, what does that mean? I think one of the biggest problems we have back to federal data sets is that essentially we say it's either intended or unintended, when in fact we know that it's a continuum. Feelings change, and there was a paper delivered at PAA a number of years ago that said that if you are able to ask the male partners, there's dissonance between the report on intentional status in over 25% of the cases. So even the partners can't agree all the time on what intent was. So I do think we need more nuanced measure, one that allows for complexity, ambivalence, and it's sort of, I actually don't even know what I was thinking at the time. Having said that, though, common sense and I think our experience does show that there is a way to approach this with some intentionality, some advanced thought that can distinguish it from just, I had no idea. And I commend to you the One Key Question effort centered in Oregon. The idea is that all providers, and your point about health services is very, very important. Whenever a woman, teenage, adolescent, whatever, young woman comes in for whatever, primary care, immunizations, that one of the questions that's asked, and of young men as well, is, are you planning to become pregnant in the next year? Or are you planning to cause a pregnancy in the next year? If the answer is yes, particularly for the woman, there's a lot of preconception care, good primary care, get risk factors under control, so on and so forth. If the answer is no, then we want to get her very quickly attached to the best family planning clinic we can to get the very best methods. Very gentle question that doesn't ask sort of long-term intent, and it doesn't ask it retrospectively, which is what the NSFG does. It says prospectively, are you planning to do this in the next year? And I think that is the way to approach the intentionality issue, rather than this endless problem of trying to reconstruct what happened several years ago. Remember, the NSFG is a 5-year retrospective sample.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everyone in our audience here and online for being with us, and especially Sarah, Ron, and Evelyn for sharing their wisdom about how to use evidence and data for addressing social issues. Thank you.